Hi, welcome back to another episode of Unique Moments, where I talk about things from my unique perspective. So we are continuing with the Universal Law series, kind of nearing the end. I believe this is law number 9. So it's a law of relativity. But before we get into that, I pulled a card already. I shuffled them and I pulled. And the one that we pulled for this episode is anger. And it's very interesting. So there's like a bee on this card. And I don't know, when I think of bees, I don't think anger. Like, it doesn't make me think of that. So I think I don't know. I'm wondering what the correlation there is. It like when bees are angry, that's when they sting you? Because generally bees represent community, life, nurturing, sweetness, honey. Anger is different, but I'm gonna read what it says. I've been pulling this card a lot lately, which is also strange to me. So anger, it says, a very strong and primal emotion. Anger sometimes catches us by surprise. At other times, it seethes just under the surface, simmering along until it boils over, scalding anyone who is close. Anger is based in fear. Fear of loss of control, fear of not being loved, fear of being judged, fear of not being enough. When anger enters your life, be it yours or someone else's, go beneath the surface and try to address the real fear that has triggered it. Anger doesn't go away without addressing the underlying fear. Alternately, be aware of someone's anger directed toward you. Ooh, that just made sense to me. Okay. Now we're getting it. Now it's making sense. Okay. Is anybody mad at you? Are you mad at anybody? And that kind of goes into the topic of relativity, because the law basically states that everything is relative, right? So even if we're taking anger, you could be mad, but judging by what the card is saying, there's an underlying fear there. You're not necessarily angry at the person. The person isn't necessarily angry at you. They're afraid of something. They're fearful of something. And depending on what it is they're fearful of, that could very much be relative to the situation. So yeah, I just know it's not good to hold anger in. I don't get angry easily. It takes a lot for me to get angry. Although I do think people get angry at me. So that's another story. That's another story for another day. And maybe that's just a lesson of, okay, what lies beneath the anger? Because no one wants anybody to be mad at them, It is a very primal emotion, and it can be scary depending on what you do when you get angry. Some people see red. Some people black out. Some people lose control over your senses, over your rational mind, over your way of thinking. Anger is a very, very powerful emotion, and I think it's to be channeled for sure. But I think when it is triggered, I think we so often go to calm down, cool off, take a walk, just breathe, when, hold on, the anger is trying to tell you something here. I think see what's triggering it. And that's the thing. We never look at the triggers. We never look at the triggers until we're triggered again. And then we just want to make the feeling go away. We just want to make the anger go away. We don't want to address it because we don't want to yell. We don't want to get too loud. We don't want to get too out of pocket. We don't want to get too beside ourselves. And it's like, maybe you need to get beside yourself. Maybe you need to get beside yourself just a little bit, one time, and then figure out what the anger is trying to tell you. And maybe that's for me, but figure out what the anger is trying to tell you. Figure out what the anger is trying to tell you so you can figure out what kind of fear you have. And then let the anger dissolve. Okay. Interesting intro. So the law of relativity. The law basically states that everything is relative. So basically, things don't have an inherent meaning. They only have a meaning based on the definition that we give it. It's only in relation to something else. So cold and hot can be relative. If I live somewhere that is super hot and it gets to be, upper, let's say hundreds. If it gets to be in the hundreds, that's hot to me. If someone who lives where it's quite literally freezing all the time, it may get above a cool like 80, 85, and they're like, man, it's hot today. But that's relative. What's hot to you might not be hot to me. What's cold to you might not be cold to me. And that's with even just like food temperature. Some people, me, I like really, really hot food. Like I cannot stand eating cold food. I cannot stand eating room temperature food. But what is cold and what is room temperature? You know, to someone, my hot food could be intolerable. You know, it's all relative. It all depends on what you're comparing it to, really. And that goes with so much, like art, for example, art, music. It's all relative. You could find your favorite artist. A lot of people, Beyonce. A lot of people say Beyonce can't sing. A lot of people worship her. Idol. That's their everything, you know? They know all her songs forwards and backwards and all the runs and will never miss a note. And they think she's the best thing on earth. And other people think she can't sing to save her life. It's all relative. It depends on who you're talking to. Artists, the most relative thing. People, you know, arguably there's Picasso, there's Mozart, there's Basquiat, there's these famous artists, Andy Warhol, you know, where it's like, that's just art. We've, as a collective, decided that whatever art they were making, that's art. Frida Kahlo, you know, these are artists. But even then, you might get one person that says that is the ugliest painting I've ever seen. Someone paid money for that. And meanwhile, someone would pay thousands of millions of billions of dollars for this one piece that someone quite literally could care less about. It's all relative. And I think that's what's so cool about art too. That's what's so cool about, honestly, anything being in a creative. And like being the creative is kind of iffy, you know, because it's so subjective. It's so subjective. It's like you could create something and one person could absolutely love it and then one person could absolutely hate it. And you're like, is this good? Is this bad? But plot twist, it's relative. Okay, so there's this parable of this Chinese farmer. It's a story, and this farmer, so he has one horse on his farm, and then his horse runs away. And his horse runs away, all of his neighbors find out about it, and they come, they gather, and they say, oh wow, we heard the bad news, your horse ran away, how sad, how unfortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day, his horse comes back. And with him, the horse brings 7 other wild horses. And so now he has 8 horses instead of the 1. And then all of his neighbors come around and they observe and they say, oh, wow, what great fortune you have. Now you have 8 horses. How lucky. And he says, maybe. And then the next day, his son is trying to break in one of the wild horses. And so he rides it. And then his son falls off, breaks his leg, and is bedridden. Now he has a broken leg. And then, of course, all the neighbors, nosy neighbors, they, they hear what happened to his son, and they come and they gather and they say, oh, wow, we heard what happened to your son. That's so unfortunate. We're so sorry. And he said, maybe. And so the next day, the conscription, which I guess is the military, they came around looking for people to enlist in the army, to conscript into the army. And they were going around and conscripting every son, but they passed up the farmer's house because his son had a broken leg. And so he passed him up. And then the neighbors said, wow, how lucky that your son didn't have to go. And he says, maybe. And the story kind of ends there, but it's just a testament to how we never know if something is good or if something is bad or really why something is happening until we're in it or until after the fact, until we can see it hindsight. So I like that story because it really puts things into perspective of we don't know what's good news. We don't know what's bad news. We don't know what's fortunate. We don't know what's unfortunate until it's related to something else, That's also how, the setback could be the comeback, or so many L's that can be used, that can be seen as blessings in disguise, So many things in life are seen as blessings in disguise because we don't have the full picture yet. We can't see the full picture. All we can see, maybe we can plan for the next 2, 3, 5 years, but even that, it's an estimate at best. It's a guess at best. We don't know what's going to happen. We can't see the future. And I think while we can't see the future, we would like to think we know why things were happening. You don't know why you didn't get that job. You don't know why you did get that job. You don't know why you had to end that relationship or why your friends left. And maybe now it looks good, maybe you're feeling good, living better off without them. You're in a good space, you're in a good energy, unbothered, at peace, and you think this is good. But then maybe something happens down the line when you're like, oh, maybe this was not good, or vice versa. You left a job that you thought you were going to be at for the next 10 years. Maybe you got fired, maybe, or maybe you never got the job. You thought you nailed that interview. You thought you really had it for sure. And I think a lot of the times we attribute it to like, oh, God doesn't want me to have this because, there's a bigger plan for me, or this is not where I was meant to be. And sometimes, sometimes that is true. Sometimes that's very true. Sometimes it is on us. And I think we just fumble things and we like to wrap it in a little bow and say, and I do agree with this, so I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, because I think on the one hand, yes, whatever is for you cannot miss you. The things that have your name on it, no man can take from you, no man can keep from you. Whatever God wants to do in your life, whoever God wants to place in your life is going to be that, unless you find a way to mess it up. But then again, what's for you cannot miss you, and what misses you was never for you. I do believe that wholeheartedly. But I also think that there are some things that we can't see. There's some things that we can't see, and that we're not even qualified to even say that. Like some things we're not even qualified to say, oh, God has a bigger blessing for me. We can think that, but the truth is we don't know. A lot of the times it does get worse before it gets better. A lot of the times you'll think, oh yeah, God took me out of this friend group because he's elevating me. God's isolating me because he wants me to be better, be wiser, be different, be set apart, and all these things. And while that can be true, while that definitely can be true, sometimes it's for reasons that are unknown, and you don't find out until later. And so I think don't be so quick to say what's good and what's bad, and what's favorable and what's not. And that also goes with I think people too. It's easy to write people off. Prime example, one of my best friends, one of my really, really good friends, our relationship from the very beginning has just been great, wonderful, fantastic, very easy. We've never had like any real rough patches. It hasn't been difficult. It just flows. It's just very easy. But this is not the typical friend that I would have. And it has nothing to do with looks or nothing to do with personality. It's just a vibe. I can't even explain it. It's just a vibe thing. They're not the type of person. Their vibe is not what I would normally go for. And for whatever reason, it just works. And had I listened, or had I made a prejudgment about, oh, this is what this person is about, this is who they are, I would have never taken the time to get to know them. Because a lot of the times people can be different with you. People can be different in a different setting. And so someone's personality or how someone acts is also very relative, because they could just be acting that way for you. They could just be acting that way in the moment. They could just be acting that way on a random Tuesday. And that's what I think people really need to give grace for. I'm really good about like petitioning this in my own life, and I think by now my friends have caught on. But even now I think it gets a little annoying, and maybe it's a byproduct or a side effect of wanting to live in the moment. But I think you can both live in the moment and plan for the future at the same time. I think that is a smart way to live, because if you're always in the future, always planning, always when I do this, when I get here, when I have this, when I want it, then you're never being present and you're never in the moment. And when you look back at life, were you ever really living? Were you ever really living if you were never really present and just always trying to get somewhere? There's nowhere to get to. There's nowhere to get to, if we're being quite honest. Because everywhere you're trying to get, when you get there, you will be there. But you won't be there if you don't take the time to be there, like truly be there. And so I think the thing that I'm good about exercising in my life that I feel like gets a little annoying is like I'm consistent for the most part. However, my views, my opinions, my thoughts, they change. They change, especially I read, I learn, I study, I research. I have newfound opinions every day. If I discover something new, I'm not just going to stick with the old way that I was thinking with my old belief. I found something new. Now we can adopt something new now. And so I think in my life, what I exercise is don't hold me to the standard. Don't hold me to the standard that I was living by yesterday. Yes, it can change. It can change just that fast. It can change in an instant. And if you're really my friend, I would expect you to change with me. Again, I'm not changing it on you every day. However, be ready, stay ready, so you don't have to get ready. If we need to change it every day, if we're changing that frequently, change with me. But all that to say is people are relative, because you can't just keep them in their box. You can't just say, oh yeah, I knew them for 7 years and so I pretty much know what they're about. They could be different in that 8th year. They could be different in that 9th year. They could be different in that 10th year. They could be a whole new person. I feel like I'm constantly reinventing myself, a whole new person. Everything is relative. And that's why I never assume. I never assume that I know anything or that I know someone, and I never put anything past or beyond anyone. Because what I know is that I know absolutely nothing. That's the only thing I know, is that I know nothing. And I'm committed to continuously learning. And not making judgments and not making assumptions about what things mean, because everything is relative. It's all relative to whatever's going on at the moment, to perspectives, to attitudes, to feelings, to emotions. And that can be a little scary, to think that things can just change at the drop of a dime, and that up doesn't mean up and down doesn't mean down, and the definitions are changing. But then again, we live in a very quickly, rapidly adapting world. It's 2024. If you're not with the program of change, honey, you are getting left behind. You are getting left behind. And that's really all there is to it. So, yeah, that is the law of relativity. Until next time.